Hi guys, welcome back to another Archi Diaries video. This is week 9. I've decided to change the setup just for this video, just to kind of experiment and see how this might look and whether the lighting is better, hopefully the sound is okay. And if you're new here, I'm just basically going to be walking you through my design project and what I've been up to this past week. So this is week 9. It's gone really quickly, I would say, the past 9 weeks, but I think the project is finally starting to come together and it's still really fun to explore all these different avenues. And I just wanted to kind of recap on what I was up to last week. So I was looking at weaving patterns, which are specific to areas within Iran, specific to the kind of person creating these carpets. And basically this is like a hand knotted type of weaving a carpet essentially. And so basically I was told to develop these a bit further and create my own hybrid versions. And throughout the past week I also did a couple of sketches and drawings, which you'll see later on. So I started off by taking these patterns, which you'll see on top of here too, and just kind of like photoshopping them together. I took maybe like 2 or 3 for each different pattern and just thought about ways in which they could kind of like connect and relate to each other. So obviously these are just kind of like experiments at this stage, but I also decided to, make my pages a little more portfolio style. So I've added like a title in the top right corner, added a page title over here. I also included a little scale bar because I was imagining these as archaeological drawings, and so they'd ideally have a scale and it fits in with the narrative that I've already created, which is this idea that all my elements are kind of scaled according to these crumbs within the carpet. And so then what I did was I took these hybrid sort of photoshopped versions and then I actually really thought about the design and composition of patterns that I could use. So I came up with these 4. I've also labeled them. And I think when labeling them, it was more so that they could fit into the narrative that I've already developed, but also so that I can kind of like associate them and use them later on as a kit of parts or a set of components within future drawings. So this first one is called Pond Bridge. I wanted to kind of merge elements from this whole idea of a paradise garden, but also thinking about the components used in circuit boards and what they do and their purposes and so on. So this particular one, just called Pond Bridge, I thought it looked like a small bridge that you kind of have in some larger gardens. The second one is a diamond diode, so kind of again playing on this whole idea of celestial qualities and also like circuit board components. And then this one is called water rippling. I thought this one, although it's very complex, it's kind of got 3 different patterns used within it, but I kind of thought like the differences in between like the gaps of like the weaves and like how they're interlocking together is almost like a rippling effect. This last one is called connection traces. This is more so like a little gradient weave. I actually didn't like do much to this. I only tweaked it slightly from that previous version, but I quite like how it's basically like changing with each weft or warp. Yeah, so then my next step was basically to kind of like imagine using these patterns. And so with this next drawing, I really wanted to create a drawing that uses those patterns, but then also starts to kind of like imagine this carpet in progress. And so what I did here was basically stitch together elements from the patterns, but also from previous model exports that I did, and start to kind of build this carpet, I suppose. And so like the idea here is that the bottom of the carpet is basically the foundation that they lay. And so usually this is not anything kind of like colored thread or anything like that, and there's no patterns here yet. It's just to kind of like lay that sort of border. And so then as you move up on the carpet, you kind of start getting these different gaps, and you can see the patterns coming through and so on. And then I wanted to kind of like add color, and like this top portion is basically thinking about the carpet as it's being weaved. And so you're kind of pulling in elements from circuit boards, you're kind of pulling in like developing these patterns throughout, and everything is kind of like not really you know, like it's not really put together yet. It's still kind of like in progress. And yeah, this drawing went down really well, so I was really happy because it took me quite a while. I think I spent probably like 2.5 days on it, completely entirely in Photoshop. Obviously, most of these things are kind of like recycled elements that I've used previously, but there are also exports that I've done from models that I'm currently working on. One comment which I found interesting, which my tutors had, is that try and lose the kind of like hands. Obviously in this kind of drawing I was kind of trying to add like context so that it's kind of showing someone weaving this whole thing or like a portion of this carpet, but that's a very kind of like standard thing to do in architecture drawings. So instead they suggested you could almost like frame this whole drawing into like a loom, which makes a lot more sense. And the next steps for this drawing is now to kind of model it all in 3D, which I think should be really fun. So I'm going to be experimenting with that a lot more this week and trying to figure out how I can bring those textural qualities but also the intricacy of the patterns, and really think about like the connection and whether these needs like knots or they need kind of like separation between like different sections. And so like while I was also doing this, I'm also like developing the models that I was doing previously, where I take like electronic waste and those kinds of objects and form them into like bigger sort of well-known objects, I suppose, to do with gardens. So this next page basically looks at this model that, you know, it's still a work in progress, but what I did was, this is the like fountain of computer mice, and then I also created like this kind of like bottom element which makes it into a transmitter tower. So I'm playing on this idea of using like a substation, for example, and reimagining it within this new like paradise world that I'm creating. And so I kind of wanted to like sketch over it and like really work into it a bit more, and add those like magical qualities. So I did that, and then I also was modeling part of the substation, looking at infrastructure in particular. And I think that's a really cool point and a cool kind of like theme that's come across over the last few weeks, is that I think it'd be nice to kind of imagine what various bits of infrastructure might look like, and if we kind of got rid of all the architecture and just had all this infrastructure left, and you kind of like condensed it and then started weaving them on purpose, you'd almost get this kind of like really thin and delicate layer of architecture, but it's all made up of objects that we don't typically see, so you're bringing the inside out. And I think at the moment like scale and things like that doesn't really matter, so it's okay. So I can still kind of like experiment without having to worry about how it might look in plan or section or elevation. And I also really wanted to kind of experiment with the rendering style as a whole this week, so I started doing that a bit here. My main kind of like key like sources or inspiration are from Pinterest and looking at other pieces of work, but I wanted to kind of get a general like style going in terms of how the page might look. And another key kind of task that I want to do this week is start working on the portfolio and putting together my pages, just because I want to kind of like stay ahead of that and make sure that I don't kind of like lose track of, you know, all this work that I'm doing, because it is a lot, and trying to like condense it into something that, you know, almost doesn't really feel like a portfolio. It's more like a narrative or a storybook that's kind of explaining how this carpet's being designed and created and woven. So yeah, I think it's at a really good place right now, and I'm basically just, again, developing stuff, testing things. So it should be interesting where this project ends up before Christmas. I think my goal is kind of to have a really solid narrative for one, but also a good idea of what the project is and like the scale and that kind of thing. But for now, it's just about kind of like creating and developing and testing things. So yeah, if you do have any questions, let me know. And if you want to keep up with my work, please do follow me on Instagram. It's to.scale. So yeah, hope everyone has a great week ahead.